This is the plaintiff, Robert Montana. He says he entered into an agreement to borrow $75,000 from the defendant to pay off some real estate taxes, and at the last minute, the defendant backed out of the deal. Now the unscrupulous defendant refuses to return the money he gave him for closing expenses. He's being unfair, and that's why he's suing for the $4,750 he's owed. This is the defendant, Thomas Gubatosi. He says the $2,500 the plaintiff gave him is a non-refundable deposit to cover closing expenses. The plaintiff signed a contract, and he doesn't have a leg to stand on. He says he's like Donald Trump. He just doesn't lose, and he won't today. He's accused of backing out.
All parties, please use your right hands.
Welcome back to the People's Court. Next case on the docket. The plaintiff made a deal to borrow $75,000 from the defendant, paid all the closing expenses, and then the defendant backed out of the deal. But the defendant says the money was non-refundable. It's the case of backing out.
Thank you, Douglas. Okay, Robert Montana,
yes,
you
ma'am.
are suing Marie Holdings Incorporated, represented here by Thomas Gubatosi.
Yes.
You're the owner? Okay, for $4,750. You want the $2,500 you paid them for preliminary expenses on trying to get this loan paid back to you. Plus, you want him to pay your late tax payment penalties because you didn't get the loan. All right, let's try to backtrack and start from not quite the beginning, but the beginning of what would become this case. You owed back. How many properties do you own?
6.
Okay, and on one particular property, what are we going to call that property? The one where you were trying to get the loan to pay the back taxes?
That would be Oxhead Road.
On Oxhead Road, is it a business establishment or is it a house?
It's a one-family residence on 2 1/3 acres.
All right. You were behind in your taxes.
Correct.
Property taxes.
Yeah.
All right. How far behind were you in your property taxes?
On that particular property, I was 3 years behind, and other properties, I was behind 2 years.
So you were seeking a loan from him. You are both. You're the actual lender, or
Yeah,
you are the
I'm
broker?
I'm the actual lender.
You're the actual lender. You were seeking a loan from him in the amount of how much?
At the beginning, $75,000.
And the $75,000 was supposed to cover what?
Taxes on various properties, but not all in full, not the full
So you owe
taxes.
more than $75,000 in back taxes?
Yes.
How much do you
Yes.
own in back taxes?
At that time, I was probably about $100,000 behind for 1 year. It's probably a little over $200,000 behind. That would pay all the taxes up to date.
Okay, how'd you get so behind?
Well, we were going to retire, and we were going to sell the properties.
But you can't sell them unless you own them, and you can't own them unless you don't have liens, and you have liens if you don't pay your taxes.
Well,
We all have to pay our taxes.
One of the properties was a small shopping center, which was worth almost $1 million.
Okay.
And
so that one property that's a small shopping center that's worth almost $1 million,
yes.
How much mortgage do you have on that?
We have a $200,000 mortgage on that.
So who's we? How many people own that property?
Just my company.
Just your company?
Just my company.
All right, so you have $800,000 in equity?
Yes.
Okay, so why didn't you just borrow against that?
I didn't want to do that because I wanted to sell the property, so I vacated the tenants. A couple of tenants showed that they wanted to move out, so I said it's easy for me to sell the property to someone else. And that
All right, so in any event, you hire him, you enter into negotiations with him, you pay him $2,500 for preliminary expenses, to set this up to get a loan for you in the amount of $75,000. And you were going to be using as collateral for that loan which properties?
The Oxhead Road property, which there is no mortgage on.
Okay.
Okay, and that property was worth between $225,000 and $300,000.
All right, so you are putting up the Oxford property and
as additional collateral, the other property, which has a
when you say the other one, you're referring to the shopping center.
Shopping center.
The $1 million property.
Correct.
Okay. So at some point, the 75 wasn't going to cut it. How
Correct.
come?
Because we went to the closing. Tom was not at the closing. His attorney was. And when we got to the closing, they wanted me to pay all the taxes on the shopping center. All the taxes on the Oxhead Road and all the taxes on the shopping center. I said, there's not enough money with $75,000. You didn't tell me that. We discussed I was going to pay some taxes on these various properties. Not all the taxes, just to bring it up so I wouldn't lose the properties. You have to pay taxes, otherwise you lose, they'll take the
Yeah,
properties from you.
I know. I pay my taxes. I got it. I'm not sure you know.
So, no, I
but yeah,
do
but
know.
you floated as long as you can float it. I got
Right,
it.
correct.
And so you floated it on everything, and then you're supposedly borrowing this money in order to pay those taxes,
On
but they
someone-
want you to pay the taxes.
In full, but that wasn't what we agreed on.
Do you have anything that, okay, let me just ask you, what was the reason the closing didn't happen that day?
Closing didn't happen because money was there, the lawyer was ready to close, the lawyer was a bit taken aback that he didn't have the additional monies to be current on his taxes. If I take collateral, those taxes need to be paid in full that
Did you
day.
know that the $75,000 you were loaning him were to pay back taxes?
I knew they would have paid back taxes on various properties, but certainly the properties that were going to be the underlying collateral, taxes need to be made current that day, or I'm behind them. And
But how? But you put, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? If that's the money he's going to use to make them current, then
He never specified. He was very worried because he was so far behind in his taxes, he was subject to a tax deed surrender. So he's afraid he could lose these properties
Right,
at
so-
any point. He said he had multiple properties with back taxes. I had no idea, or I didn't inquire which properties had which taxes on it, but the underlying collateral obviously would have to be current in taxes. No lender would loan money on a property that's behind in taxes the day he's writing the check.
So, how did it reach the level with you involved and your lawyer involved? How long does it take to figure out if back taxes are owed when the subject of back taxes is coming up with the guy
Well,
constantly? It shouldn't be at a closing that someone finally discovers this.
No, it wasn't finally discovered at the closing. We were aware he needed the additional 40. We assumed he'd be coming with it.
Well, did you talk to him about it?
Didn't think there was a need to. We agreed to loan him $75,000 to clear up taxes on various properties. So we were under the assumption that he'd be coming with sufficient money to close. Sufficient money meaning enough money to be current.
So your assumption was all this guy needs is $75,000 and then everything will be current.
No.
If he had only needed $75,000 to make the properties that you're interested in current, the closing would have happened. The problem is that making those two properties current cost more than $75,000.
And our assumption was he needed $75,000.
Right, but is what I just said right?
Yes.
Okay. So how much more did he need to make the two properties that are your collateral current?
I have a copy of the closing statement that my lawyer made up, which says he was about $40,000 short.
$40,000 short. So then what happens? Then you guys renegotiate. Tom says, all right, you clearly need to borrow more, so let's look at this, postpone the closing, and then you were going to borrow $99,000, right?
Yes, but then Tom says to him, this is on the phone, I don't see Tom, he's not there. On the phone says, well, I want to see this Oxhead Road property.
Yeah, because I was gonna, this whole deal was for $75,000. Now I need to see the property. How do you loan money with property as collateral that you haven't visited in all that time?
Because it was $75,000, I assume the land value was probably about $150,000, and
so
I did have the
you go out
second
to
on
the
the
Oxford
other.
property, and what is it?
I was in shock.
So is real estate generally a good investment, or is it just too risky?
It's a good investment.
Because?
Not sure, but it's a good investment.
What do you say, Donald Trump?
Oh my God. It's proven to go up over time in value, so.
Good investment?
A bad investment.
Because?
Because
This is a guy who made a bad real estate investment. Right?
pretty much.
That's all we need to know, going inside the courtroom.
What he represented as a 3-bedroom house was a 5-room shack. He currently has it listed, it's 512 square feet. But I was aghast because, quite frankly, if I would have done my due diligence and looked at the property, I probably wouldn't have committed on the 75. It's a 512 square foot shack.
I know, but that's what you want to keep your money for, is the due diligence. He
Yeah.
wants his money back because he feels like you waited until the last minute to do that. And what's your response to that? Because you say, I'm keeping it because I did my due diligence, and the reason that the loan didn't go through is your fault because you needed more money or whatever. But what's your answer to what he said?
My answer to that is the reason that he executed a note and mortgage, which ultimately had to be voided. Right in the note that he signed, and I have a copy of the note, one of the conditions of default is if he's not current on his property taxes on the underlying collateral, the note is immediately in default and he gets accelerated to my 24% default rate. He would have been in default walking in the elevator, and I would have declared a default, and he would have had more problems. It's very clear the documents he signed, the documents his lawyer had prior to the closing, they had, the note he signed says he's in default if he's not current on his taxes.
May I see that?
Yes, you may. Also, the closing statement with the lawyer's notes.
Well, what happened was we signed all the papers, and then when they said, well,
And what-
this is
hold on
what
one
you
second.
need,
Is
and
4
he
and
did it.
5
Pages
on
what?
the note. 4 and 5, Your Honor, is the beginning of the default. Section 7 says failure to pay any real estate
Wait,
taxes.
which letter?
Letter C.
C.
I'm
Okay.
sorry. Item
That's all right.
7 on page 5. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Okay, letter C, item 7, failure to pay any real estate taxes or any property on any property securing this note when due. Yeah, sure does.
That's if the note was, that's if
Sure
he
does. All
lent me
right.
the money.
So, and first of all, under any circumstances, why would someone else have to pay your late tax penalties that have accrued through years of neglect on your part, as opposed to, hey, you didn't get a loan? Like, if you didn't get a loan and I were to entertain making them return the preliminary expenses that you paid them, why would I ever also say to them that they have to pay your late tax penalties? I mean, it seems to me like you're kind of like hanging on a thread here right now.
Which I'm not, Your Honor.
Well, then you know what? You
If
need to get more reasonable and sell something and pay off some people.
Well, I secured the loan in March.
Yes, that's just more debt.
No,
Like,
no,
I'm
no,
not
no,
sure you
no.
follow. It's all right.
I know-
Listen,
I know it's more
I'm
debt.
sure you've made money and you've been able to, good for you.
Your
Good for
Honor,
you.
I've been a
But-
real estate broker since 1961.
Good.
Your Honor,
Good.
may I?
I've been
I've
here
always worked
since
for myself.
1961.
61.
That's when I got here. Go ahead.
Mayor, Your Honor, and my commitment letter clearly states that his $2,500 will be forfeited, and as well as that,
And actually, you have that it'll be forfeited if it's his fault. That if it happens through no fault, that then the closing cost, that the expenses will be paid, and then the rest will be returned. And when you itemize your expenses, because there was a lot going on here, including legal fees and everything else, your expenses come out to $2,250, right?
in addition, the title closer
Wait,
was.
how much? So give me all of your expenses. That's what I need to
Your
say.
Honor, which it says here, he has to send me his attorney has to give me a copy of the itemized cost, which never did happen. He just ignored every text that I sent to him, and I have a copy of
The
all my texts.
expenses are attached to the closing statement I gave you, Your Honor. You can see a canceled check there to the title closer for $250, and you see my lawyer's invoice for $2,250. You'll also see a copy of a canceled check from my company, Marie Holdings, that was deposited December 10th for $76,000, so the money was there to fund. I don't make money by not funding. And I find it highly offensive that he accuses me of not funding. It was
That's not an
his
issue.
fault I couldn't fund.
That wasn't the issue of the funding.
Yeah.
So you said that
Based
I
on,
spoke to you. I never spoke to you.
No, we're done. Based on what I'm looking at, I do not hear anything that would cause me to find the failure to close to be their fault. In fact, there appears to have been a willingness to even loan you more money, subject to this new arrangement between you of $99,000 and not $75,000, subject to him looking at it and making sure that the collateral is safe. And, that doesn't mean zero. That has a meaning. That means that he has the option of bailing out if the collateral is not safe, because you're the one who needs more money. So it's kind of you changing the parameters of it. No, I'm finding in favor of the defendant in this case. Okay. That's my verdict.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So the defendant prevails in this case. Mr. Montana's just come out of the courtroom. I could say it looks like he got trumped here today, in a way, because the defendant said he's like Donald Trump. He didn't expect to lose. So.
You know what? When you tell the truth, you never have to remember. When you lie, you always have to remember the lies. So I tell the truth. That's what
the judge went over the contracts very carefully, and in the eyes of the law, you lost. Sorry about it. Okay?
That's fine.
There were false statements, all of them. They were false.
Okay.
And he knows it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Now here comes Mr. Gubatusi. Did I say that right? Gubatusi?
Yes,
Good.
sir.
Gubatusi. Okay. Like Donald Trump.
If I was just like Donald Trump, I'd be screaming, "Lying Bob." But so I'm similar to Donald Trump. But this ended up like every other litigation I've been involved in. I won, the other litigant lost,
Yeah.
and like every other litigation, at the end of a litigation, the loser, I send a bottle of Dom Perignon and this fine crying towel. So in years to come, and when he reflects on this, he can remember his failure.
Okay.
And you can have this one.
No, catch up. Give it to him. He's the one who needs it. He's right out there. All right. You can catch him before he leaves the
Thank you very
courtroom.
much.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. All right. Harvey, what do you think?
Okay, Doug, look, the defendant in this case went the extra mile by trying to make a new loan.